Hello, and thanks for downloading, listening to, and watching the Lean Into Artcast, the show where a couple of visual storytellers get together and take on various topics that go into making things to communicate visually. We think hard about this stuff, so you will too. My name is Jerzy Drozd. I'm a cartoonist and teaching artist. Rob is not here this week. Instead, pinch hitting for Rob Stenzinger is my good buddy, Zack Giallongo. Hey, Zack.
You know, I didn't have one, but I kind of thought it would be funny if I just showed up in a wig, like long hair, and like pretended to be Rob.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
How thoughtful and introspective can you sound? Careful, measured, like every word is precisely chosen.
I think what needs to happen is, I don't know, that's my Rob impression, I guess.
It's just like the trick to do for impersonating Rob is just be extremely thoughtful.
Yeah.
So if you're new to the show, yes, usually the show is hosted by a cartoonist and teaching artist and a game designer, coder, and cartoonist. This time it's two cartoonists, and we should. It's been a while since you've been on the show, Zack.
Mm-hmm.
We should mention what you do. You are a cartoonist. I got your Patreon pulled up. Patreon.com/Zackules. And what do you do?
Zackules everywhere online. Well, a lot of people know me from my graphic novel Broxo about teenage barbarians and zombies. And a lot of people know me from my work in A Galaxy Far, Far Away. I have done the Ewoks Shadows of Endor for Dark Horse. I did 2 doodle books for Disney Publishing. Star Wars doodle books. That's where, as I say, I start the drawing and you have to finish it. And then I just had in May? I can't remember. One of those M months. My 3rd doodle book just came out, which was actually DuckTales doodles, based on the new relaunch of the show. And then what am I forgetting? Am I forgetting anything?
Well, one more thing that I got pulled up on the screen. It has to do with a pony, a spaceship, and cartoonists.
That would be the Galaxy of Super Adventure
podcast.
Which is yeah.
I figured it's gonna. I figured that is probably going to be mentioned a couple times in our conversation today, because we're going to be exploring collaboration. Because the other thing we got to mention is you and I have a new comic coming out at the time of this recording. What? We're like a week away.
Today's Thursday. Almost exactly a week away.
And this comic, which if you follow us on Instagram, I'm Jerzy Drozd on Instagram. He's Zackules on Instagram. You've probably seen teaser images for this, but this is the first like proper formal announcement about it. It's a mini comic called Dino Sword. Have you been practicing the pitch at all for it, like the hand selling pitch?
Yeah, but I want to save it for the show. I don't want to. No, I haven't been practicing. What is the pitch? What is that pitch, Jerzy?
I don't know how to describe it that well, because this was actually like, and we'll explore that even more fully in the full episode. But this was a story that you began, and then you kind of asked me to join in on.
I did.
But it's barbarian fantasy with dinosaurs.
Well, I'm careful about the barbarian thing because I did the barbarians with Broxo. This is really cavemen. Cave people, so this is even more primitive than barbarians. This is barbarians without any metallurgy, without any smelting power. Yeah.
So yes, it's a 16-page story that we've been working on for a little while now, and we're debuting it at A2CAF. And there's a lot of new experiences for me on this, in that believe it or not, this is my first time inking somebody else's work in my 20-something years of making comics. And also it was I think the first time I was brought in on a property that was already partially developed. Like I've done work where I've drawn other people's comics. Like, when I worked at Ninja High School, here's the premise, here's the characters, here's the whole story Bible and whatever. I've done things where I co-develop it from the ground up, but never something where it's like it's almost done and I come in and like make a few alterations with the creator. And also, this is a unique collaboration in that we are both, I would say we are equally skilled in almost all aspects of making comics. So this wasn't a situation where we were saying like, oh, I need a letterer. Can you letter this for me? I need an inker. Can you ink this for me? Right?
Yeah. I would say definitely with the craft in terms of the sort of the actual making of the comics. We both have experience in sort of all of that, which is, the penciling, the inking, the lettering, the writing, things like that. But I think, and I don't know how much you want to dive into it right now. Do you want to just...
Well, you want me to hit the bridge music so we can just dive into the topic?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, well, there we go.
Let's be diving in.
Let's get together, yeah, yeah.
And there's the signal that we are now 10,000 feet up.
Let's get together.
All right, so collaboration is the topic of the day. How do you work together? How do you find collaborators? How do you think about what you're looking for in a collaborator? Why collaborate at all? In this day and age where like technology has helped so many people be able to get to a finished product. Like I was just using the app Canva the other day. You're familiar with this app, Zach?
Nope, that's a new one on me.
It's like a web-based app. You can use it on your phone. You can use it on like a browser, and it's basically like a graphic design application. It's not anywhere near as fully featured as Photoshop, but you can do quite a bit of stuff with it, and it's free. And it's like it was astonishing to me that we're at this point where you can have the equivalent of like 1996 Photoshop in a web browser.
Well, I was just gonna say, I don't want to digress too much, but are we in the new stage of when Photoshop became popular, and then you had people who didn't have a lot of design skills or illustrating skills and said, oh, but I can do a pretty good approximation with Photoshop.
Right.
So
right,
but that's another topic. That's another can of worms topic. But
my point is that like there's more and more arguments to not have to team up with somebody anymore. And so I'm curious, like, if we can dig into like the collaboration on this project, and then maybe in the second half go into the why we decided to do this. So do we want to, so having sort of loosely pitched the book so people have a sense of what it's about, cavemen and dinosaurs and some science fiction elements. What does the collaboration look like? How did we put this book together?
Well,
what?
Well, do we want to talk about the actual collaboration of the production, or I think we should step back a little bit and maybe talk a little bit about the pitching of the project, like basically how I came to you.
Okay,
and,
yeah,
and
that
sort
sounds
of
good.
Why we did that. So this was an idea that I've had for many, many years at this point. And so we've talked about, cavemen, dinosaurs, some sci-fi elements, things like that. But I also really wanted it to be kind of my love letter to action cartoons that I watched when I was a kid that influenced me. So things like Masters of the Universe, Thundercats, Dungeons and Dragons. I'm wearing a Dungeons and Dragons shirt. And there's only one other person who I know very well who is a creator and is even more steeped in that black tea of adventure 80s cartoons, and that's Jerzy Drozd. So I think I had even sort of come to you before with this idea just to get some feedback and things like that.
I remember you sharing the pitch, because you actually had like a proper like pitch for a publisher put together for this thing, and I remember you sharing it with me years ago, asking for my input on it.
Yeah, and I remember I did that because I was like, if there's anybody who knows if I've got it right, it's that guy. And then as time went on, I just, I just started feeling like, there was a lot, obviously, that I could bring and wanted to bring to this idea, but there was a lot that I felt like you could bring to the idea as well. Strengths that you had that I didn't. And that's one of the other things that I wanted to mention is, we sort of talked about how we could do, either one of us could have made this book on our own. And that's not to sort of sound pompous about it. That's not to be like, oh yeah, we could have done this. But it's to show that it was a really conscious decision. And like you said, the sort of like, well, why? Then why did you collaborate? But, I think that a division of labor and just sort of playing on our own strengths was something that was really appealing to me. And I'm glad that you sort of took the bait.
Took the bait. Yes, Zach catfished me, everybody. He was actually pretending to be Alan Oppenheimer, the voice actor of Skeletor, through email. And I said, I'd love to work with you. And then he's like, surprise, it's not really him, it's me.
I pulled off the mask and...
So then you asked me if I'd be interested in possibly doing some development work on it with you. And I remember like leading in with some disclaimers. Like I had I had a clear set of parameters, like, okay, well, this is what I do and this is what I don't do, right? Like because I know that having read your stuff, you do some stuff that's over PG-13. The werewolf story, I forget the name of the werewolf story that you did.
Yeah, Gordon is just a friend.
Gordon is just a friend. Yeah,
definitely
that one is
above
certainly
PG-13.
And so, like, knowing that you have that flexibility in your work, I was like, well, if you're going to work with me, I won't do more than that. And I think I also warned you, said something about, like, I really have a proclivity for making characters yell at each other. That's like my favorite thing to do. So, like, if you're okay with that, then we could probably work together. But that's like, those are the two things I'm going to lean on a lot.
Yeah.
But then we started doing some style tests. Like, I remember that there was a lot of you drawing the characters and penciling them, sending them to me, and then I was trying out various inking techniques. Like, okay, well, I'll use this digital inking technique. I'll try that digital inking technique, and I'll try inking it on paper. And I gave you lots of different versions. And I think I did 2 different inking styles, if I remember right. I did like a smooth line, I did like a really jagged line, and then I did like a brush pen.
Yeah, I was gonna say at least 2. And I actually I like this sort of anecdote about the inking as I understand it.
Okay.
But I don't know if you want to...
No, tell me how you understand it.
So as I understand it, we had sort of talked about the style, and we had talked about this, how much we wanted to be conscious of the fact that we were kind of trying to look like an old animated cartoon. And my inking style, I think, tends to be a little more, maybe a little more textured, slightly than yours. You tend to be very clean, very, very precise in your inking. And there's not a whole lot of daylight, I don't think, between your inking and my inking, but I think enough that if you look at it, you can see sort of, you can pick up these differences. And yeah, you had done a style that was digital, that was very smooth, very sort of like, kind of as clean and as even as you can get. And then you did a style that was also digital, right? But was much more sort of jagged and energetic. And I think... And I remember being sort of a little... Neither one of them was quite lighting my fire.
I remember the exact words you used.
Oh,
and
please share.
I knew what you meant, but I remember thinking, like, if I didn't know him so well, I would have been ticked off. You said, if you're going to ink it like that, why ink it at all?
Oh, man. Just a simple question, not trying to not trying to hurt anybody's ego.
No, but thankfully I instantly knew what you meant. You were challenging me to create lines with character in them, create lines with like texture and personality, and I could see how my super clean stuff might not register as having like a lot of what people would call character. Like I just had a conversation with Mark Siegel recently about what he calls the handwriting of comics, and like not the lettering, but like the overall.
That sounds like a very Mark Siegel phrase.
Oh, I'm still looking forward to talking to him at A2Cap because I got a feeling he and I are going to get along a lot with like art philosophy. But but like the character and quality of the line adding up to the kind of overall characteristics that helps you identify like the way you identify somebody's handwriting, right? And so I inferred that that's what you were going for. And I remember that very day, I was like, well, I'm going to print out another batch of the pencils and I'm going to sit down with my brush pens and I'm going to ink this as if I was just doing a sketch. And I remember I turned it back over to you and I'm like, I don't know, is this done? I had this kind of like, I think this, and you were like, that's it.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's how I remember it. But because there was, because now there was sort of that energy and that organic line that was happening. And part of why it looked organic was because it was organic. It was brush pen. And again, I think it just, to my eye and to my mind, that was just really what suited a project like this.
That's something I want to dog ear for the second half when we talk about some of the why stuff. Is like there was throughout this project, there was a lot of moments where I was like, well, I'm just going to trust Zach's eye on this because I think I'm too close to it. I can't tell if he's as happy as he seems to be, then it's good. But like there was a lot of moments when I was inking the pages, I was like, is that done? I don't know. I don't even know. But I think part of that was coming out of like learning how to communicate what I think you were trying to communicate in the pencils too, which maybe we can talk about more as we go along. But okay, so we established that very early on. We're like, okay, Zach's got a pencil, Jerzy's got an ink, probably Jerzy's got a letter because he's kind of tightly wound when it comes to sound design.
And just to jump on that a little bit, that was a case where you were sort of a little bit not hesitant, but I think that you were at first you were being a little bit deferential. You were sort of saying you were basically saying that if I had a way that I wanted it to be lettered, that you were mostly comfortable with me doing it. And then I turned around and said, I have no love for the lettering. And knowing that you do, again, that was a case where it's like, okay, so of the two of us, one of us not only is stronger in lettering, but also I would venture to say enjoys it more. So
yeah, I really do like
that's a clear, easy decision, and especially where, especially where we both have this love of sound effects, but your love of sound effects goes so deep. Your love of sound effects and sound design is commendable, and so that really was like, again, I'm happy to sit in the passenger seat on that one.
I think that's worth noting and underlining too, is that a lot of the decisions we made about the production came out of which one of us likes to do that more. Like we're probably pretty evenly skilled on a lot of these things, but like you made it clear, like I really, really like penciling. I'm like, okay, I like penciling too, but if you want to do it more, that's fine by me. And that gets us to the next step, how we wrote the darn thing. So like after we established the style, we figured out what the production flow was going to be once we get like pages to work on. But then it comes down to how do we write this thing and how are we going to divide up that labor of, thumbnailing and just drafting the darn plot. And now this is where it's worth bringing up Galaxy of Super Adventure, I think, because thankfully we both had some experience in writing together at this point.
Yeah. And I think that we, after how many episodes of Galaxy of Super Adventure, and even just, the sort of constant contact, I think that you and I have gotten skilled at knowing, well, like you said, sort of what the other one means, or what the other one is sort of shooting for, even if they're not able to kind of like I'm doing now, even if they're not able to articulate it, quite on the nose. And again, things like, if you're really careful, I think you can listen to those shows and kind of start to feel like, what's a Jerzy joke, what's a Zack joke,
Yeah.
things like that. And most of the time, it's just us telling Ben what to do.
And Ben's not here to defend himself.
Nope.
Yeah. So we had figured out like how to write together. So I didn't really explain what Galaxy Super Adventure was for those who haven't checked that out yet. It's a podcast where the premise is that Zach and Ben Hatke and Lucy Bellwood and I are cartoonists on a spaceship in outer space, where we talk about comics, but are frequently interrupted by various space characters. Space elves, a guy from the Department of Transportation who likes to give us information about things, and a pony who I went to high school with. But anyway, so there were skits that we had to write for that. We wrote a lot of skits, and by the way, I bring it up as well because later on this year we're going to drop the final season finale. Finally. Anyway, but so we had a sense of how we could write together. So we just opened up a Google Doc and started outlining it. And one thing I remember doing early on was I said, okay, well, if it's 16 pages, if we approximately say like the first act in quotes is this pages 1 through 4, second act is 6 through, or 5 through 9 or something. We broke it into chunks of like, here's the beats we got to hit, or at least like gives us a framework for thinking about beats. And then I think it just started with you writing the first 2 pages of dialogue, and then we started building off of that, right?
Yeah. Just to kind of go back a little bit, I think, do we want to sort of, so I think that working on comics the way that we did, and I think this is, before we go forward, is sort of important, I think is actually pretty unusual, because we've both quote unquote collaborated with other people, like you said, whether it's drawing someone else's comic, things like that. But generally within the world of professional comics, that interaction between creators is kept at really a bare minimum. I've drawn several graphic novels written by someone else, and there's an editor who is, the mediator, who is kind of the go-between, and as the artist, you're given a script and you draw it. And so you don't have sort of this back and forth happening the way, for example, you and I did. So I think that that's just sort of important to note, that in some ways we were kind of, and I think we still are, kind of navigating this jungle a little bit.
Yeah, that's true. We didn't have an intermediary. And I also remember having an early conversation saying that we never did do this, but I was like, I think we should write a contract that says that we promise to stay friends.
Yep. Yep.
But thankfully, we're both laid back enough that I don't think we got into any arguments about anything while working on this thing. But
no.
But yes, most of the time when I've collaborated on projects, I've had a couple where I've collaborated with friends in the past, but it wasn't like talking over Skype kind of things when we had the story discussions. It was usually done entirely over email. And then, when I do professional collaboration on other projects, it was all done through an editor. So this is a situation where we're meeting face-to-face on Skype and literally having a conversation like we would if we were in the same room. And with the Google Doc open and typing into it while we talk.
Mm-hmm. So we sort of came up with a skeletal premise that we knew, we wanted to do in these 16 pages. And I think that we came up with the idea. We knew we wanted it to be essentially a pilot. So how can we tell a story in 16 pages that in some way introduces the I would say medium to large size cast that is, projected for this larger story. How do we kind of, is there a story we can tell where everybody kind of has a little time in the spotlight, we learn a little something about them without being sort of mechanical about it, another without doing like a book of bios or something.
Right.
And then we came up with sort of a little plot that would do that. I guess I wrote the first 2 pages, and I think even then, as I was writing dialogue, I wasn't writing exact dialogue. I was writing, this character says something to this effect.
Mm-hmm.
And then you and I kind of batted around, well, what does that sound like? How does this character express this idea? How does this character get this character, And again, that's all writing. Like if somebody in life, if somebody wants someone else's attention, is it a character that says, excuse me, pardon me, or is it a character that says, yo, something like that, and you have to think about those things.
Right. And how can you get them to say plot-driven dialogue that also reveals something about the characters in her life? You're learning both things at once. Now, but at the same time, I feel like we did not dialogue it all out at first. So we started with a couple pages of loose dialogue, and then from there we broke it into a page-by-page sort of action breakdown. So like you got the ball rolling with like an initial scene. Okay, open scene. The characters in the woods and they're talking about this, right? Mm-hmm. And then from there, we said, okay, given that setup you gave us in the first 2 pages, here's the logical breakdown of logical. It's not logical. These are the things that we perceive as obvious and or surprising and or delightful things that can come as a result of that premise that you set up.
Mm-hmm.
And we wrote out a sort of like page 8, this essentially happens, page 9, this essentially happens, and so on. Like just giving that one paragraph kind of thing. If I remember right?
Yeah, that sounds about right. It was all, and it's funny because, you go back and you try to talk about this, but it's so, when you're actually doing it, it's so, to use the word again, organic that, again, like you can hear us. We're sort of like, I think that's kind of how it happened, because it all just sort of like builds up in this weird way that doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense, but
yeah, this is what makes,
there it is.
I this is like a little bit of an axe I have to grind as I'm getting ready to do the book tour for Science Comics Rockets. It's a natural question, who did what? But it's so, when you're in the thick of it, you're not paying attention to that. You're just like sort of enjoying the joy of creating something with somebody. So you're not keeping score on anything. Like some memories stand out, but for the most part, it's just this thick, messy thing of like making stuff. And the reason I have an axe to grind about it is because the whole post-industrial revolution sort of Marvel and DC era of assembly line making comics, I think that screws, borrow language from Brandon Dayton, it screws with our minds a little bit in terms of making us not think of it as art anymore, but like creating widgets, right? Whereas like if you ask an artist how do they make the thing, right? Like nobody would think that Andy Warhol would go up to him and be like, who did what? Like, and he did have assistants, right? But
yeah, I mean, and I think that's something that's sort of lost too, is people don't always know necessarily that, even like fine artists and stuff, they have assistants, they have people who, but like to think that there's like some kind of ear work that comes into play is like, I think is part of what messes with our brain. So anyway, like some of this this is my pupilling pen, and I get the pages and I apply the pupils to each eyeball carefully.
My pupilling pen.
It's my pupilling pen.
I'm totally gonna capture that. Oh, I'm gonna use that on the book tour. Oh man. Okay, but where I was going with that outline business is we like sort of just came up with like a rough breakdown meaning a 1 to 2 sentence description of the essential action of each page. And then this was the other neat thing that I've never done before is we actually split the book up. We said like, okay, what scenes do you want a thumbnail? What scenes do I want a thumbnail? And that was fun because it was neat to see your take on some of my layouts, and it was also neat to see your visual storytelling approach sort of harmonizing with my visual storytelling approach overall.
Well, one thing that I remember, you're talking about sort of clear memories, and the thing, this is where it gets tricky because we can't talk too much about the actual story because A, nobody has read it, they won't know what we're talking about, and B, we don't want to spoil anything yet. But I remember there was one scene with the main character that I think as we were kind of going through and figuring out who wanted to thumbnail what, that was a scene where I think I had told you that I had a very clear, in my mind, I had a very clear sequence of events for that. And so I sort of called dibs on that one. Because it was something that was, like I said, I already knew what it looked like. I just had to put it on paper, and, to try to explain to you what it looked like would just be clumsy. So I remember I took that one right away.
Yeah. Again, it was divvying it up by like who had the strongest desire for what.
Yeah. And I think one of the scenes that you thumbnailed, which is the scene at the lake. I got those thumbnails back, and I was just like, oh my god. You hear about people. You hear about like filmmakers and stuff who they talk about how they get something back and it's better than what they had originally envisioned, and that was how I felt like specifically about that scene. I saw those thumbnails and I'm like, oh, this is so much richer than what I would have done for this kind of scene. And that was really great. But I remember
I know the panel you're talking about is the part where it's looking at the scene from underwater, and we're looking at
that exactly. But yeah, so we sort of went off and thumbnailed, and then we came back, and when we came back to look at each other's thumbnails, I don't feel, and I mean, you can push back on this, I don't feel like either one of us necessarily had a real sense of ownership. In other words, meaning like, yes, we had thumbnailed it, but if you had an angle on one of my panels that you thought was better and I agreed, then it was like, yeah, okay, there it is.
There are 2 pages in the book. There are 2 pages of the book that each of us thumbnailed, and when we got back together to review them, the other totally reworked a significant part of that page. Right?
Yeah.
There was a page there's a campfire scene, and I think I originally had it with fewer panels, and you were like, no, we need this reaction to happen here. I'm like, well, that's gonna add 2 more panels, and you're like, well, yeah, here's how you do it, and you showed me. I was like, oh, okay, that's great. And then there was one where you had 2 panels that I was like, no, this really needs to be 1 panel, and I'll tell you why. And I made my case.
Yeah. And we had to do that. We were actually, how it had thumbnailed, we were actually a page over. And so we had to figure out how to combine stuff, and you got in there and you did it. And I'm thinking about that panel, a panel that you had where you had sort of an aerial view. And I think all I did was, well, what if instead of literally being above these characters, what if we were more below the characters? Yeah. And you agreed. So, yeah, little things like that.
Go ahead.
Nope.
Okay.
I was finishing my thought.
But yes, so there was this period where we went off and thumbnailed our own scenes, but then came back together and then revised the thumbnails based on the others' reactions. And yes, some pages just like made it through whole cloth, but other ones were like, no, well, let's play with it a little bit. But you're right, there was never a sense of contest over whose voice is going to win out. There were parts where we both had strong feelings, but I think it was one of those things where the other one just like, I think one of the unspoken rules we had throughout the project was if the other one feels very strongly about it, I'm going to shut up and listen. And if I don't feel terribly strongly about it, I'm going to back off. If I have something to push back on, I will. But, there was a sense of, change my mind, push on me on this because we wanted the project to be good.
Yeah, I don't, I feel kind of funny saying this because I feel like in the VH1 behind the music, this is when this is like the early years, right? And then they show when this all completely flips. But and about how like we don't talk, we don't speak or anything.
Well, we all know that you'll be the Gene Simmons of the team, but yes.
With the massive toy room, you mean? But I don't think, at least for this, like it didn't ever feel like there was an ego necessarily, you know, that there was sort of like, this is my vision and I'm giving this to you, and if you don't like it, you can just, you know, use bad words.
Well, I'm dog earing this for the second half as well, because I wonder how much that had to do with the fact that we're just making a mini film. I feel like there was very low stakes on this. And we hadn't told anybody that we were doing this yet, right? So at this point, like, it was just between you and me. We hadn't made any kind of formal commitment to any external entity, and just to make a 16-page mini. I have to wonder how much that had to play into how we behaved toward one another.
And let's be clear too that, you know, we talk about, you know, this sort of larger story, but this mini was not only a pilot for the story, but a pilot for, I mean, I think we were both clear about this. Do we want to do this? Do we want to do this together? Do we want, you know, it was sort of a test balloon for that. So
that is really, that's a good note. Let's follow up on that in the second half of the show, which we'll get to in a minute. Okay. We got to get through the rest of what the collaboration looked like. So we met up, we revised the thumbnails, and we had a master PDF of like what the thumbnails all were now in order. And then the next step was we had a couple sessions where we sat down together on Skype and dialogued the whole thing.
Right.
And this was also new for me, because dialogue is something that historically for me is something that I do alone, and it's me pacing around the desk for hours trying to think really hard. But this was really fun because it was us just bouncing ideas back and forth off of each other. It's probably the closest I'm ever gonna get to like what people call the writer's room.
Right. And I think that what was useful about that too was, again, kind of sitting there and kind of, you know, figuring out the dialogue. And like I said before, knowing the characters and saying, well, how would this character express this idea versus how would this character express the same idea, and how would it be different? But I think that also what's great about that is sort of working over Skype and figuring out that dialogue. One of the things that was really useful is it's useful to sort of have a bit of dialogue, but to hear someone say it, right? To hear someone that's not you say it, whether, you know, you say a piece of dialogue or I say a piece of dialogue, and then a lot of times, you know, you go, that's awkward. That sounds awkward. That's awkward to say. What if we just change this word?
Going back to the characters at the lake, which I'll pull up the cover again. There's two characters in the story, and this, I won't spoil anything, but there's like a bird guy and a beast gal who are friends. And I remember us wringing our hands over the dialoguing of those two characters, saying like, what are we implying if we have them say it this way? What are we implying about the relationship if we say it that way? And this is not to say like, are we giving away too much? Are we not revealing enough? Are we No, we were thinking about like, what does the relationship between these two characters, what kind of effect could that potentially have on a reader? And trying to really think about other people's experiences, other people's points of view, and really think hard about this is something we want lots of people to read. So put myself in somebody else's shoes, right? How would they react to the characters talking to each other this way, right?
Yeah.
And
well, and you know, again, and for example, I know this all sounds like really vague, but like, you know, I remember one of the things that we had said was we have one character who is very cerebral and very intellectual, and another character who is the opposite.
Very impulsive and, you know, more irrational. Well, not irrational.
Visceral.
Visceral, yes.
Yeah. And, you know, one of the discussions we had was they have affection for each other, but we knew that the one could never condescend to the other. And so that was always a thing that's like, well, okay, this character needs to convey this, and needs to convey it in a way that is natural for them to convey that information, but it cannot ever be condescending to the character who is not as intellectual, who is not as cerebral.
Who has a form of intelligence that is just a different kind of intelligence than that character. We need to be very mind that the two of them would respect that about one another, right? And so like it took us a while to land on that rule. Like that was not so I think this is something that's important to unpack and demystify in terms of the creative process, is that people say all the time, like, well, you have to really understand the characters. Well, like any skill, you don't show up with the knowledge ahead of time, right? You discover it through the interacting with it. And so when we sat down with these two characters, I was pelting a bunch of assumptions at you. You were pelting a bunch of assumptions at me, and we were reacting to each other's assumptions to land on, oh, you know what? We can never have this character condescend to this other character, or even write a line of dialogue that could be read that way.
Right. Which was, which can be tricky, especially when you have characters who are in this affectionate relationship, because you say to yourself, okay, well then how do they speak intimately? How do they speak in a diminutive sort of way to one another, but again, without it seeming like one is at all demeaning the other or belittling.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because again, that's the natural thing, right? Like when you're close to somebody, you speak in a way to them that could be demeaning, or or could be misconstrued somehow as demeaning. But it's not, because that's that's how the relationship is understood between those people.
Right.
So yeah, boy, it's
so that I think that was probably one of the most labor intensive parts of this project, was like really figuring out those voices over a number of long Skype sessions together.
Yeah.
And so after we did that, so like, yeah, we're summing this up in like 5 minutes, but this took weeks and weeks to do. Then it fell on me to do what's called balloon spotting, which is to say I took the script that we had done now, because now we had like a page-by-page breakdown of the action as well as panels, because we had the thumbnails, and now we had the actual dialogue. And so on top of the thumbnails, I drew where the balloons would go.
Now, Jerzy, why would you do that? Don't the balloons just go on digitally onto the art afterwards?
Now, Zach, I know you're trying to troll me a little bit.
No, I am not. No, I'm not trolling you. I'm your plant. I'm opening the door for you.
I see. But why would I do it? There's got to be a better way.
There's got to be a better way.
Has this ever happened?
I lift the garbage bag and it all falls out. Oh my, we need to make this. We need to make this. Are you tired of trying to cram the letters into a comic panel? And then the person's all like,
oh, he's got a guy just pushing a bit like this.
Black and white, right. Drab. There's got to be a better way.
Oh, God. But yes, why would you do balloon spotting? Well, okay. So I need to give credit where credit is due. I learned this from Dan Mishkin, from working with him on projects. I never did this. Well, I always, in my final thumbnails, historically, for my own personal projects, I actually put the dialogue on the thumbnail to make sure it'll fit. And to, like, I realized in retrospect I was doing balloon spotting, but the way Dan did it, it was so much more elegant and efficient, is that you number all the dialogue in your script. So, each character's name is there, but then next to them is the number of what balloon it is on the page. And then on the page, you sketch out, you take the thumbnail and you draw in where each balloon would go, approximate the size of what the balloon should be, and then just put the number in there. And the reason you do that is that dialogue is the first thing people are going to look at in your comic. Typically. I know there's going to be some people who are more aesthetically or artistically drawn to look at the visual information, but the dialogue is what most people are going to use as a wayfinding device. So you want to place it in a way that guides the eye through the page, complements the composition, and integrates into the page in a ways where you're not covering up something vital to understanding the entire panel or the storytelling. Neither are you putting the balloon in such a place where you would miss it if you were scanning the page normally. So there's a very delicate balance, and I'm sure most letterers would agree with me on this. There's a very delicate balance to integrating it in a way that is visually pleasing, that is clear, that doesn't interfere with the storytelling or get in the way of it. You don't want to draw too much attention to it, but you also want it to make absolute sense. Like, oh yeah, there's no other place that balloon could have gone. So yeah, it's something that I largely intuit nowadays after making so many comics, but it's something that I'm very careful about. So yeah,
It's
describe it.
lettering is a compositional element to the image. And if you're not thinking about them both at the same time, it's very easy for an artist to draw a panel and then for whoever is lettering that to have to end up cramming things in or covering things up. I had a teacher when I was in school who came from a very traditional newspaper strip background, and I remember him telling us, when you have that square panel in the news strip, the top half is the words and the bottom half is the image. Which, you think about it and you're like, well, that's like no space to draw, and it's like, yeah, you gotta account for that. So these balloons are spotted on the thumbnails, and then I got those, and what I did was I took those thumbnails into Photoshop. I blew them up to 11 by 17. I did the panel borders, all that kind of stuff, and then I printed them out because I still don't draw digitally. Printed the pages out, which had just a very light ghost of the thumbnail over it, and then I just went in and I tightened up the panels, kind of got everything looking, more than a stick figure. That was just sort of my basic roadmap. And then I penciled that, tight to how I wanted it to look, and then scanned it back in and sent it to you.
At which point I printed it off on Bristol. I've got a page right here.
Actually, I have some pages right here too.
So without, I won't hold it up for too long because, again, spoilers. But yeah, so I printed it out in non-photo blue like so, and then inked it up with brush pens like so.
So actually, hold on. Hold that page up again. Hold up that.
We could do before and after?
Right, so that panel. So right here, see if you can see that.
Oh, I'm seeing the monsters.
It's hard for me to. Anyways. So this is the original pencil of that panel.
The art is in two places at once, Zach. It's like Time Cop. If these ever touch, we'll destroy each other.
Oh my god.
But yes, so that was, and then I think a very last minute decision we made as we were crunching on the deadline and looking at like, oh, we really want this to be done in time for A2 CAF. I think I pitched the idea to use like, well, what if instead of coloring this, I just halftone it to start with, and we could do a color one later on down the road.
Yeah.
We needed to save time.
Yeah.
And that's how creative decisions are made sometimes.
Yeah, and then that toning is done digitally.
Yes. So I decided to, because I have some watercolor brushes that I bought from Ray Friend for Clip Studio Paint that look pretty darn convincing. Mm-hmm. And then lettered it and hand lettered all the sound effects based on my intuition, and also based on Zach, you actually put the sound effects into the pencils, so I had like a reference point of like how you imagine them working with the composition, right? Which was actually super helpful. Mm-hmm. All right, so that's how the collaboration happened. So how about we take a break, Zach?
Okay.
Do an ad spot, and in a minute and 30 seconds, we'll come back and talk about why team up with somebody. What did we want to get out of it, and what was our decision-making process to get to where we got with this thing, and maybe some reflections on now that we're done with it, or nearly done, what we think about it. All right, does that sound good?
Yes.
All right, so in a minute and 30 seconds, we'll talk about all those things. But the first things first, we got to talk about some people who make this show possible. And those people are the folks who support us on Patreon. Yes, patreon.com/leanintoart is the website that you can go to support us. What is it? It's a way to give us a monthly upvote. Way for you to say $1 a month or whatever you can afford. You believe in us and you believe the work that we do. And we want to thank 5 people who have been supporting us in that way. First up, Mike White. Mike White, you can find on Instagram at FE Follies. Mike has been posting all sorts of comics on Instagram. Follow him at FE Follies. Also, Jesse Kaufman, longtime friend of the show, dear friend of mine. Jesse, thank you for supporting us. You can find Jesse on Twitter at Jesse Kaufman, Kauffman. And then the Mysterious K, who we don't know who they are. We don't know what their real name is. We don't know what their Twitter handle is, but we thank them for supporting us. And Shawnee Redfearn. You can find Shawnee on Twitter at Shawnee Redfearn. Thank you, Shawnee. And finally, Brandon Dayton, longtime friend of the show. Also going to be at A2CAF next week. An amazing inker and illustrator and author of Green Monk. Congratulations, Brandon, on Green Monk getting picked up by Image. And you could join them at patreon.com/lean-into-art, where you will find all the shows we make, as well as the extra leans, the shows we record only for Lean Into Art supporters. And those posts become an open mic post where you can talk about whatever you want with us in a safe place where only fellow leaners hang out. And we want to thank everybody who has been doing just that. Once again, patreon.com/lean-into-art. How's that?
Ooh.
No, it's almost like I practiced it.
It's like you do it every week.
It's like I do it once a week. All right, here comes the next part of the show.
Thank you for being a friend.
Speaking of teaming up,
the road and back again. Your heart is true.
And
you're a pal and a confidant.
This is the part of the show where we talk about the whys of why we're doing what we're doing. Why even do this thing in the first place?
Are you a Rose or a Dorothy?
Oh,
you're kind of a blend, I think.
You think so?
You're kind of a 60% Rose, 40% Dorothy, I think.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
because the thing is you have Dorothy's maternalness, sort of den motherness, but you don't have her snark.
Mm-mm.
You know, Dorothy is very like comfortable referring to somebody else as an idiot, and that's not you.
Oh, that's just mean.
Yeah.
And also I don't know like how to like what the kids are saying, like pushing up the ceiling and things like that.
Well, that's your Roseness, I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But certainly not a Blanche.
See, I think I'm a Rose Blanche.
Yeah, that seems like a Venn diagram that you would sit comfortably within.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to go down this rabbit hole any further. Now I'm sensing another Galaxy of Super Adventure episode. Okay. Let's dig into why you team up with somebody, because there was a lot of instances we described where we kind of agreed that, well, if somebody else wants to do it more, they can just do it. But I could have done it, right? So then why team up? Why ink at all? why have somebody else even put their hand on it? You know?
Well, one of the things that comes to mind is let's talk about a purely utilitarian reason, which is comics are a lot of work. And that if either one of us had made this comic, it literally would have taken twice as long.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that is a very, maybe it's not a very, like, romantic or sexy reason, but I think that it is a reason, which is just because it helps you get it done, you know? If you can have somebody else, you know, jump in and take care of some of the production, whether it's somebody coloring. I mean, you know, you talked about the sort of Industrial Revolution assembly line comics. There's a reason for that. And one of the reasons is because if you look at like a Marvel or a DC comic, if you look at a 22-page, 24-page full color comic, that is a hell of a lot of work for one person to do every month.
Yep.
So, you know, simple as that.
No, that's a very good reason. These comics are incredibly labor intensive. So more hands in there means that more gets done for sure. Matter of fact, yeah, I had that in my notes. You mentioned like a division of labor, and I thought, what an interesting word to use. It's a labor.
Mm-hmm.
But you use some other language in here. You said if there's anyone who can do it, it's that guy. If there's anyone who could help me like achieve my goals on this thing, it's that guy. Because I could easily argue with you and say like, well, if it's just a matter of getting a warm body in there, just go on Facebook and say like, anybody want to help me make a comic?
Right. I mean, you know, there are a lot of people I could have teamed up with, and you know, I'll be honest. When I asked you to do this, I think if you had said, and you still have this option, I think if you had said like, you know, it's not really my thing, or if you had said, you know, I want to concentrate on other stuff, or you know, whatever it is, I don't know that my plan B would be, well, all right, who else can I ask to help me with this?
Right.
It was specifically, hey, I know somebody. I have a close friend who I think could really, in my mind, elevate this idea that I have. I'm not... look, even like I had this conversation with Callista Brill, who was my editor when I did Broxo, and I asked her sort of about like the working relationship. And one of the things I had said is I said, look, I am not coming to you claiming to know the very best thing to do for the characters in the story at 100% of the time. You know, I think, so, you know, as creative people, sometimes we want that push and pull, right? We want, like, is this actually, validate me. Like, is this idea that I have really good? And if it's not, please tell me. You know, am I off base here? Am I off the rails here? Or is, you know, am I right? So I think that that's a part of it too.
I was just listening to an interview with John Cleese, where he was talking about some Monty Python sketches, and he was describing the collaborative process with one of the people on the team, and he did a little bit, and then somebody reacted positively, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you need to write that out into a full skit," and so he starts writing it, and he's like, "Is this funny? Are you sure? Like this is hysterical. Do it." And he's like, and he writes a little more. He's like, "Are you sure it's funny?" He just went, the whole time he just didn't know. He had no idea if it was funny or not, but he knew it was making this guy lose his mind, right? And it wound up becoming some famous skit that I'm not familiar with because I'm not that familiar with Monty Python. I think it's something where somebody goes into a pharmacy looking for cheese.
Oh, the cheese shop. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Okay, probably a bunch of other people listening know too, but I'm sorry I didn't know it. I was just interested in listening to John Cleese talk. But like, I think about that, like, yeah, that's a lot of the creative process for me is like, is this good? I don't know, maybe, you know, and then like, I see how people react to it. I'm like, okay, that's a signal I can run with. Like, that's clear. And the same thing happened with this in that I shared some snippets online and like some people who I respected were like, oh, those lines look so good. And I'm like, they do? Okay, Zach was right, I guess. Yeah, there's 3 votes now.
Can we make a shirt that says that?
What?
Zach is right.
I guess Zach is right.
I guess Zach is right. Yeah. That's even better. I like being resigned to it. I guess Zach is right.
Three out of 3 cartoonists agree. I guess Zach is right.
Hashtag.
But yeah, there's something that I think is very rewarding about getting that. Well, it's something that comics is one of those art forms that you don't get a lot of immediate feedback. I mean, you really don't, right? Like you work for a book on a year, and then you wait for another year for it to come out, and then
I mean, you hear about the people who have sort of gotten into the well, I think about like webcomics people, people who have gotten into that rhythm of putting stuff out once a week or 3 times a week or every day or whatever it is. And that's one of the things that a lot of them have said is that they get that relatively immediate feedback, right? You put something up, people like it, people comment on it, you know, that's it. For the types of comics that I'm used to doing, you know, and I think that you know, you're used to doing things like that, which is you go away into your cave for a year and you don't, you know, you get very little sort of feedback on it, and then you just sort of burst forth after hibernation, and you're like, I don't know.
Is it good? We'll find out.
Yeah.
We'll find out June 12th if Rockets is any good.
Ooh, that was a good plug. That was
Yeah, I liked it.
expertly done.
Lift it right in there. But I wonder if this is a case to be made for more people, because I'd push back on the webcomics thing a little bit in that I did an ongoing webcomic for a while, and when you're shipping a couple pages a week, yeah, you're getting a constant feedback, but you're not getting feedback on the project as a whole necessarily, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they don't. One, it's not done, and two, if something like Mining for Trouble, the Boulder and Fleet story that I finished a couple years ago, it was 88 pages. So you're talking about like it's over a year by the time you get to the end since people read the first page. And I'm not expecting people to go back and read everything up to this point every week, right? So is all of that fresh in their minds? Do they have that sense of perspective? Probably not. Not likely anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And then furthermore is like it's hard to. The comics industry is very small, relatively speaking. Most everybody knows each other or knows of each other, and it can be very intimate. However, finding friends who have the time to carefully review your work for you is super hard, because they're all scraping by and scrambling all the time and always low bandwidth.
Mm-hmm.
So all this together, I would submit, makes a case for every once in a while doing a collaboration, a small collaboration with somebody, because when you're having that writing session with somebody and you're sharing pages back and forth with somebody who has like all that perspective of what the story is, you get a lot of really good instant feedback, right? A lot, very rich feedback.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I know that we've talked about this on other podcasts and things like that, but yeah, one of the things, and in our teaching too, is when you're looking for feedback, I think you do have to be not careful. What's the word I'm looking for? Intentional about the people who you're getting feedback from. Like we all say, like, don't get feedback from your parents. Just unless your parent is, I don't know, Jeff Smith or Bill Watterson or something, like.
Especially if it's Bill Watterson, yes.
Odds are your parents are not going to be giving you a really clear feedback, that can be trusted.
Well, there'll be a lot of warm intention in there, I'm sure, for most people. But is there necessarily the perspective and the deep knowledge of the material and relationship with the material that you have? No.
Right.
Not necessarily at any rate. I mean, there's people like Lucy Bellwood whose parents were creative people, so that their input is probably very, much more on point.
Mm-hmm.
But without getting too generalizing about this, but yes, it's. So I want to define this word richer. I just mean that it wasn't just good job, thumbs up, star, heart symbol, smiley face. It was, oh, I like this specific thing you did about this. Are you sure about that thing? And then you look at it and you're like, oh my gosh, you're right. That does need to be fixed. Like there was one page where like I didn't notice it until you saw it. You're like, there's a big black blob in the bottom of the page now because of the way you got those two characters half-toned. Mm-hmm. Like, oh my gosh, you're absolutely right. That's got to be fixed,
Yeah. Yep.
So,
and
that's what I mean by rich.
Yeah. And I mean, even stuff where I know I drew stuff and asked you, I was like, do we need to switch these two panels? And, and you'd be like, nope, don't, leave it the way it is, or, just does this angle make sense? Because like you said, you get so close to it that it can be really tough to kind of, you need a fresh set of eyes on it.
I want to dig at something you said a moment ago, though, and I feel like I'm pushing us a little bit off track with where I was going, is you said being intentional about who you get feedback from. And I want to dig at, how do you be intentional about who you want to collaborate with? So like there's people listening now who are like, wow, that sounds like such a rich and rewarding experience, what you guys went through. How do I find somebody to do that with? How did we, I feel like right from the start, there was a high degree of trust involved. And I'm wondering how we got there.
Well, it's funny. I was thinking about this discussion of collaboration, and I kept returning to advice or experience that you would get from almost or regarding any close relationship, including, whether it's close friendships or, romantic relationships. Do I want to date this person? Do I want to marry this person? Do I want to live with this person? And I realized that I think if you kind of go down the list of things that you're looking for, it applies here too. One of the things that, I knew was that I felt like, and I don't know, maybe there's about to be a bombshell. I don't know. But at least to my perception, you and I have a relationship where I feel like we can be frank with one another. Mm-hmm. And that's, important to something like this. And what I mean by that is, I didn't feel like, if we were doing something in the comic or the story that made you uncomfortable or you didn't agree with, I knew that you would say so. And, you would find, because you're Jerzy, you would find sort of a tactful way to approach it. But the point is I don't perceive you as someone who would just sort of let this thing stew until you get grumpy. And then it's like, yeah, no, just do it. Just do it.
Yeah. That's a good point. That's a very good point. Cause I've had those relationships.
Right. And then it's like, well, and then you get to the end of it and it's like, well, wait, why do you hate this project? And it's like, well, because, you didn't listen to me for this thing that I talked about way at the beginning, Yeah. There's sort of this, and this is, I think this is useful again, unless this turns into like Love Line or whatever. But like for any relationship, one of the metaphors that I really like is this idea of a road trip. And if let's say you're driving from Boston to Los Angeles, do you tell your significant other, hey, I'm leaving, I'm going to Los Angeles, I'll call you when I get there? Or, do you drive and then from Boston and you stop in, Pennsylvania and you give a call, hey, I'm in Pennsylvania. Yep. This happened. All right. Yep. I'll talk to you later, and then you drive and then you're in Cleveland and you call, hey, yeah, I just made it to Cleveland. And I think that's kind of an important thing is just sort of that communication. And within a project like this too, just sort of like having pit stops along the way where you're kind of checking in and like, is this still working? Are we both still happy with how this character looks?
We did that at the end of our meetings. Whenever we had an end of the meeting, we would check in with each other. Like, how are we feeling about this? Is this all good? Is this okay? Anything that we're not feeling great about? Which I think that's a habit we've fallen into from doing the Galaxy Super Adventure podcast.
Yeah. Yep.
I remember very early on when it was just me and you and Ben, this is before Lucy came on the show. There was a moment where I stopped us in the middle of recording. I was like, guys, I don't know if I feel okay about what we just did. That skit, made me feel a little bit awkward and uncomfortable in this way. And Ben was the one who actually says, like, we should make a pact right here and now that we will never do anything to make anybody else feel uncomfortable. And if anybody feels uncomfortable, you say so. Right. And so like that channel was opened right away.
Yeah. And the idea that, yeah, if anybody doesn't want something in the show, it's taken out, no questions asked.
Right.
So, yeah, that was, yeah, you're right.
So I think that helped us show up to this thing with the same kind of
right.
approach.
But I think also, and again, we're talking about a 16-page mini, which again, relatively speaking is kind of a small undertaking. But I think between that and the show too, that, like we talked about, I think that it helps that we both have a personality where if one of us does have, well, I'm taking issue with X, then it's like, well, okay, so let's unpack that. Why are you having an issue with this? Is this something, is this a larger issue? Is this something that can be tweaked? Is this something that can be turned into something better? Like we said, like, can this be turned into a better piece of dialogue? Can this be turned into, a stronger sequence? Things like that. Like, let's put our heads together and figure out, or do we just, scrap this and start over? But I think that communication is key to all of it.
And so we did benefit from the fact that we had a couple years of working on a very low risk thing together intermittently, get used to one another and to get used to each other's voices and idiosyncrasies and so on. But another thing that I think was helpful in this project that wasn't there for past projects for me as much was neither of us had a very strong idea of what we wanted it to absolutely look like. We both showed up ready to discover what it looked like. And there's one moment in the story where it's like right towards the end of the book. Again, I won't spoil anything, but like one of us, I forget who, there you go again, I forget who actually said this, but one of us just jokingly shout out a little tiny gag about that a character would say. Characters say this in this way. And we both laughed at it and we're like, yeah, that'd be fun. Wait, no, that's actually really good. That's really good. Let's stick with it. And then you penciled it and you sent me a picture of the pencil, said, I think we just discovered something really critical about this character with this throwaway gag. Right?
And that was it. As soon as I drew it, I texted you and I was like, we just busted something wide open with this character that's really wonderful and delightful. And it was so exciting.
Yeah. But like that couldn't have happened had either of us had a very rigid idea as to who the characters are at this point.
Right. I think, both, it's funny, like you talked about like coming into the project and saying like, well, there are certain things that I know I won't do. But it's like that weird dichotomy. It's that weird combination of sort of, well, I know that these are the things that I'm, principled on, but also having that flexibility to just let things happen and just let, so that when that wonderful thing does happen, you recognize it. Because you become too rigid and you concentrate on the road too much. You miss, the trees and the flowers.
Yeah, I'd say that's a good framing of it, because like having principles is only as good as is only good if you allow things to bounce up against the principles. Then like have a reinforced sense of what they are. Otherwise, this becomes a bromide, right? It just becomes like this sentence on your wall that's like, well, that's just what you do, son. You don't think about it too hard. Well, why? There is a moment in the story that like edges a little closer to PG-13, and I remember negotiating this with you. I was like, I see what you're going for there. This is starting to make me uncomfortable. Let's see if we can make me comfortable.
Did we?
Yeah, no, and I think the scene is really good, and it reveals something really interesting and cool about the characters. It feels very sweet and heartfelt, and it's something that on my own I never would have tried. And so, like, having your principles and showing up with a sense of what your clear parameters, what you will and will not do, is useful up to a point. Because if you plant that flag and say, nope, that sounds too much like it's getting close to my principles, you are going to miss out on some potentially really fun storytelling moments, and also just growth as an artist, finding out that, I do have more range than I thought I did.
Yeah. Well, and I think I remember bringing up the Jerzy Giallongo school of writing. Jerzy Giallongo, who I know I've brought up in, again, previous podcasts, was head writer for the Muppets. And he always talked about how when, they would write the script, they would write basically the R-rated version. And it wasn't to be edgy and scandalous.
Or transgressive.
Right. It's just how they wrote it. Just, again, what is the idea? What is the character really? What is the subtext that this character is saying? Then you go through and you make it artful. You make it poetic, and you
like Gonzo under the table doing a photo essay on kneecaps.
Right.
Which is one of my favorite jokes in all of the Muppet movies because you see him there and you're like, what is he doing? What are you doing under the table, Gonzo? Oh, he's taking pictures of kneecaps. Of course he is.
Oh man. But yeah, and again, that push and pull, like I think sort of one of the biggest kind of push and pulls was the design of a particular character. And that was when other people got involved as well. My girlfriend, Hannah O'Neill,
I just instantly sided with her too. So you were really ganged up upon it. I apologize.
Yeah,
that must not have been a fun place to be.
Well, I think it was just, it was one of those things where it was like, yeah, I was having this sort of gut reaction to like, but that's not what I want to do. But that's, and then, yeah, it was one of those things where I just, we kind of came to a compromise, and I just sort of sat with it and realized that it was the right decision to make. But yeah, I think that was the most sort of, I don't know, to even call it emotional, I think is to overstate it. But I think that was sort of one of the biggest.
That was the most friction. It's the moment with the most friction in it happened.
Yeah. And the thing is again, that character I've come to love so much and love her design a lot, I start drawing and I know exactly now how to draw her.
The design really improved. I mean, she looked great to start with, but like when you pushed it that much further, and then which also gave us more dialogue moments where, she says something about like fleas. And I was like, she's a scruffy creature, right?
Yeah.
And like that's part of her charm. And that was made more apparent by pushing the design, right? But
right.
Yeah,
yes.
I do remember that day, and I remember instantly feeling a little conflicted about it after we got off Skype. I was like, did I just gang up on him? Oh man. I mean, she's right, but maybe we could have put it in a little bit more gentle way. We should have taken him out for ice cream after that.
Well, you know what? There's next week. It can be an after the fact ice cream.
Can we take that opportunity to make some noise about that? We're gonna do last ad spot, and I want to respect your time and actually, let you go pretty soon here.
Okay.
But let me pull up the A2CAF website because we are at the time of this recording. This is going to drop Friday, June 8th. So we're literally talking about a week from this event, and it's called the Ann Arbor Comic Arts Festival in Ann Arbor, Michigan. A2CAF.com.
What number is this?
This is the 10th year.
Wow.
I know. Hard to believe. 10 years of doing
There
this.
will be kids at this show who have never known a world without A2CAF.
Oh my God. You are right. That is bananas. That makes me so happy. There are kids who are going to show up and taking this for granted, going like, yeah, I remember when the show used to be cool.
Yeah. I remember when I was 6, they had this awesome event. Oh, but it's gotten so commercial now.
It's got so commercial.
Where's the punk kids? Where are the punk kids that want their old A2CAF back?
Oh, that makes me so happy that that's a possibility. But what is it? It's a comics festival in Ann Arbor, Michigan. If you haven't heard me talk about it before, come on. And it's 50 to 60 artists from around the country come out to the event to table at the show. But then every hour there's at least one, if not 3. Actually, this year as many as 4 free comics-related workshops and activities going on. Lucy Bellwood's going to be leading a workshop on how to get rid of your artist block.
Lucy Bellwood, Rob Stenziger, Maris Wicks,
Yep.
Judd Winnick, Mark Siegel.
Yep.
Who else?
Zack Giallongo.
Jerzy Droz. Hannah O'Neill. Zach Gorman.
Rafael
Rosado. I mean, this is just This is the top of the pops happening right here. Keen Sue. Steve Haymaker.
Pranis Najikaitis. Greg Schiegel. Yeah. So
Scoot McMahon.
and so
They'll all be here, ladies and gentlemen.
And Zach and I will be there. And here's the reason I bring this up is that if you enjoyed this discussion with me and Zach, there's a drink and draw Saturday night at the Ann Arbor Arts Center where you can hang out with me and Zach and talk more about this stuff and ask your questions, interject your thoughts on the topics.
We can talk about comics. We could talk about
Relationships,
Thundercats. We could talk about collaborations, whether it's comics or, intertwining your lives together. I think I just want to be a relationship advice columnist.
Comics Love Line with Zach.
Yeah, I would be all about it. That'd be so great.
That should be a section of the Galaxy Super Adventure show.
It's gonna happen.
A music bridge, and then it's just like Zach answers emails from people about relationship issues.
Send me your relationship questions. I will answer them.
And then Mudpatch would have to chime in with his thoughts on it, and then I would come in and reprimand Mudpatch for saying something so morally reprehensible.
See, everyone out there just witnessed the beginnings of a collaboration of a new sketch on Galaxy of Super Adventure. That's pretty much how they go. So one of us gets an idea and texts the other one, and it's like, and then we could have Lucy do this, and Ben can do this. And
women only care about one thing, Jerzy, money. It'd be like that. Mudpatch is a terrible thing to say. All right. But yes. So how about we close out with final thought in just a minute? I got to do one more ad spot. So is that cool with you?
Yes.
All right, in a minute and 30 seconds, we're going to close out with our final thoughts for this episode and see if Zach has any other tricks up his sleeve. But before we do that, we got to thank some more people who make this show possible. Those people happen to be us, me and Rob. We make this show every week, and I announced myself as a cartoonist and teaching artist, which is to say a person who makes comic books and teaches people how to do it. And the comic that I hope you'll check out, especially right now, because it's just mere days away till it's released, Science Comics Rockets at sciencecomicsrockets.com. And I teased this last week. This week, it's actually live. If you go to a store on June 12th, Tuesday, June 12th, and take a picture of Science Comics Rockets in the store, you don't have to buy it. You don't even have to purchase it. Just take a picture of it, share it online with the Science Comics Rockets hashtag. I will mail you a hand-carved block print card of two of the characters from the comic, the two tortoises of Zond 5, the first living Earth creatures to orbit the moon.
What? You will mail that to me?
I will mail that
to you. Oh my god.
Yeah, I suppose you could. You could punk it that way. And I will even put in a cute sketch of some of the animals from the story as well.
That is unbelievable.
This is a letterpressed and block print card that I will ship in the physical mail to you as a thank you for helping to spread the word about Science Comics Rockets.
Man, everyone get out there and find that book.
June 12th, Tuesday, June 12th. But only June 12th. If you do it June 13th, you're too late. But you can still go enjoy the book. Rob makes a game called This Panda Needs You, and it is a game you can download for the iTunes App Store, but you can also get it on Windows at itch.io. You can get it for Android. What is it? It's a puzzle stacking game featuring this cute little panda who shows up, sees a nice, wonderfully arranged block structure, but then a mischievous cloud shows up and blows all the blocks down, and you got to put them back together the way they were. And as you proceed through the game, the panda gets happier and happier until when you finally finish putting it back together, the panda does a little happy dance, goes on to the next level, gets progressively harder. It's a very, I have the game, I've played it before on the show. It's a very relaxing game, but it does get progressively more challenging. It's got really cool physics in it, so where if you drop the block in just the wrong spot, it'll Jenga the thing down for you. So you do have to have a little bit of skill in this game, but it is also appropriate for young children. The website to go to is this-panda.com. If you are here because you're saying that's all well and good that you guys make stuff, but we're really here because the way you guys think about stuff. Fair enough. This show is a product as well, and we have more self-contained products like this show at leanintoart.com/workshops, where you'll find self-contained comics and game design workshops. You can download at a price of your choosing, even free. You can get it for nothing. But if you do get some value out of it, a really nice thing you could do is go back and purchase it for a friend. That helps more people get engaged with our work. And it's a way of giving us a little tip. If you are watching this video on YouTube right now, giving it a thumbs up helps more people find the show. If you're listening to it in a podcatcher like iTunes or Apple Podcasts, giving it a 5-star review helps more people find the show as well. And we thank everybody who's been doing exactly those things. Zach, let's paperclip an ad for your stuff on there too, because you launched a Patreon recently.
I did at the end of May, or beginning of in May. I finally, after years of talking, I finally took the plunge and launched my Patreon. So I am at patreon.com/, you got it, Zackules, Zackules. It's the same name I use for my Twitter, my Instagram, all that stuff. I'm posting a lot of process stuff on there. I'm also started posting blogs. In fact, I wrote a little blog about collaboration, which I think dovetailed nicely into this conversation. I've got some other stuff waiting in the wings. I try to post kind of something like twice a week. And then soon, like I said, I've only been at this for a month. But hoping to get some podcast stuff up there. And, one of the things I've been talking about is that one of the things this Patreon is meant to do is it's meant to help give me more time to create these comics, and also to get back to the podcasting, getting back to having time to record and edit and things like that. Instead of sort of time being divided amongst other things. So yeah, come on by, check out what I've got there, and you can become a patron for as little as $1. $1 a month. That's like a tenth of your coffee money for the week.
Oh, really? You spend $10 a week on coffee?
I think a lot of people do.
Oh.
Well, if you're getting a $2 cup of coffee every day, that's $10 right there. And that's if you're only getting like a $2 cup of coffee.
I make my own coffee, and I bet it actually probably shakes out to about that, because I get fussy coffee from Lucky's Market. So yeah, actually that's probably about right.
Yeah. And the other thing too that I would say, and so many people have been so gracious about this, even if you're not able to become a patron, or you still want to kind of check it out, even just tweeting about it, or if you want to give me a little shout out, a little like, hey, check this dude out, that's worth its weight in gold too. So
patreon.com/Zackules. And you can also just follow people on Patreon. You don't have to, because like a lot of us who use it also make public posts for that reason. So.
Yeah, and in fact, I think most of my posts so far have been public, with my patrons getting them ahead of time before everybody else. Even have a video up there with Tommy Flaherty from the Galaxy of Super Adventure.
That's right.
He's been participating in my Patreon as well. So if you miss Tommy, if you miss hearing from Tommy Flaherty from the Department of Transportation, my Patreon's a place to say hi to him.
All right. Well, and we will link to this in the show notes as well. Okay. Time for final thought. I think I have a good final thought question.
Okay.
Your work inked by me is not going to look like your work. How are you okay with that?
How am I okay with that? I think you just have to be. If I was expecting it, if I needed it to look exactly the way I ink it and I draw it, then I would have to do it. But I went into it with the expectation that it's not going to look precisely the way I do it. I think it's just managing that expectation. And I think particularly, again, looking for the choices that you have made at the inking phase, choices that may not have occurred to me, that work really well. And you say, okay, that is the thing that Jerzy is bringing to the inking here. You know, I'm not asking you, at least I don't think, I'm asking you to ink exactly the way I do.
Right.
Particularly like the way you bring to life a lot of the foliage that I kind of just scribble down. You give it this three-dimensionalness that I find really, really lovely and look forward to whenever.
And likewise,
I get the ink back.
there were parts in the thumbnails where I staged it a certain way, and then you like changed the shot without consulting me, right? You didn't say like, "Hey, I think I'm going to change the shot." Just like when you went to pencils, you're like, "What would be more interesting is if we put more depth into the shot." And like, so you take something that was much more horizontal and make it more. I mean, if I'm holding up my hands like this to like show like that how that perspective shift worked, right? Where suddenly the characters that are on the right are now on the right and closer to you, whereas the characters who are on the left are now on the left and further away from you, just to give it a little bit of sense of depth and visual variety, and also leads us off the page in a little bit more of a graceful way. And when I saw it, I was like, oh, that is not at all what I thought. That's not at all what I would have done, but I'm glad that he did it.
Yeah, and again, I think that that's probably one of the biggest things with collaboration is knowing that if you choose to collaborate with people, they're there for a reason, and they're not there, at least in a case like this, they're not there just to bring your vision to life, right? In an example like this, you know, again, like I'm not collaborating with you just for the wrist, right? Just to ink the stuff, just to get it inked.
I'm a hired wrist. No, I think if I were to put this succinctly, I would actually evoke some words of Dan Mishkin that he said to me when we were working on the Warren Commission report together. Is he said that it's safe to assume that when I ask for something, it was for a good reason. You know, that he thought through all the creative choices in the script. And when I saw what you did, my natural assumption, my knee-jerk assumption was he probably did that for a reason. Let's see if I can figure out the reason. If I can't, then I can come back to you and be like, okay, Zach, now why did you do this? And again, that goes back to that open communication that we had in the beginning, where I would feel safe about asking you. But like when I looked at it again, I was like, oh, I totally see why he did that. At least I think I see why he did that, and it works for me. Move on, ink it, you know. So yeah.
And I think some of that is just age and experience. If I was 25 doing this, I don't know that I would be as comfortable, right? Like, I don't know that I would be as comfortable just sort of letting it be what it is. So I
would think that if I were to give my 25-year-old self advice, it would be that if you don't know, ask. And know that when you guys discuss it, you both may be discovering the reason why, right? Especially if you both have similar levels of experience.
Right.
So in my early 20s, when I was working with Tom Root on comics at Antarctic Press, I remember having a lot of discussions like that where he would give me the chance to defend my creative choice, and I would just putter out. You know, I'd go, well, it's this and this, and I think it's this and I think it's that. I don't know. And he'd be like, okay, well, let's rethink it then.
Right. Yep. Why did you make it like this? Oh, because I wanted to.
Yeah. That's something I say in my classrooms all the time. Is like, that's the one answer I won't accept. You know, even if you haven't figured it out yet, you're gonna figure it out. You're not just gonna say because. I don't like that answer.
Yeah.
Dismissive.
Yes, sir.
Well, Zach, thank you.
Hey, thank you.
And
yep.
Dinosword?
So I'm sure that everybody missed Rob, and Rob will be back. But thank you for letting me sit in his chair, proverbially.
Proverbially. And preferably proverbially.
Yes.
I'll break up my pupilling pen. So yes, you can see Zach and Rob and Lucy Bellwood and all these people that you have enjoyed on the show at the Ann Arbor Comic Arts Festival next week, which means that probably, I'm guessing next week's show is going to be a rebroadcast because we're all going to be. We forgot to mention you're going to be doing a Nerd Night Talk Thursday night.
I am doing a Nerd Talk Thursday night. The Nerd Talk is in Ann Arbor, obviously, with a couple of other speakers. But I am going to be talking for about 15, 20 minutes about scaring kids in stories. I mean, it's a little more in depth than that, but
another thing I like to do to scare kids.
You jump up behind them. They hate that. See, I'm hoping there's actually going to be some guy with like a notepad or whatever who thinks that I'm actually going to talk about like how to frighten children. He's just like, "Oh, this sucked. This isn't at all what I expected. Should I get a mask or?" But no, talking about
should I pop a balloon behind him?
Talking about frightening things in stories and why sometimes those stories stick with us into adulthood. So hopefully it'll be good.
Oh, it's going to be great. I'm really, really looking forward to it. It's going to be a really, really fun weekend. And I hope everybody listening, or at least as many of you as possible, can come to Ann Arbor, Michigan next weekend for this. If not, next year, put it on your calendar. Same weekend, 2019.
Yeah.
All right.
Come pick up Dino Sword. Let us know if this collaboration is worth sticking with, or if we should just forget the whole thing after you read it.
Yeah, just like, so either give us the thumbs up or the pinch the nose and shake the head.
Yeah.
That's the rating system that we're going for.
Yep.
All right, this show is recorded every week, Thursday nights at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Central. We stream it live on YouTube and then collect it as a podcast at patreon.com/leanintoart. More social media stuff is coming up soon. In the meantime, thank you once again, Zach. Zach, you are Zackules everywhere, yes?
Zackules everywhere. So,
any place you want people to follow you in particular?
My Instagram is the most active of my social media, so that's probably the best place to follow me.
Okay. Instagram.com/Zackules.
Yes.
All right. More social media stuff happening in about 2 seconds. In the meantime, thanks everybody for downloading, watching, and listening. I have been Jerzy Droz of leanintoart.com and Jerzy Drozd on Instagram. And okay, bye.
Show notes for this episode can be found at leanintoart.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at the user leanintoart, and you can reach us via email at leanintoart@gmail.com. And remember, leaners aren't wieners. Thanks for listening.
Okay, I'm going to shut off the stream. Thanks for hanging out with us, everybody.